As Tom and Nick head towards the city, they pass by the slums on New York's outskirts. To the side of the train tracks, they see an ash-gray expanse of buildings and houses, from which workers rush to the railroad station. Above this valley of ashes, the blue eyes of an advertisement for the Dr. T.J. Eckelberg watch over the slums. Tom and Nick get off their train as Tom wants to show Nick his mistress in the slums. They arrive at a garage owned by George B. Wilson, and Tom begins to talk casually with George. As Tom and George talk, George's wife and Tom's mistress, Myrtle, comes down the stairs. Myrtle orders George to get some chairs and begins to talk to Tom after he exits the room. Tom, Nick, and Myrtle all leave before he returns. Tom, Nick, and Myrtle meet back together in New York City and look around the train station. Myrtle buys a few tabloid magazines while she's there, and the three prepare to head into town. After getting into the cab, Myrtle notices a man selling dogs on the street. The cab pulls up along the curb, and Tom agrees to buy Myrtle a dog. As Tom, Nick, and Myrtle arrive at Myrtle's apartment, Nick tries to leave. Tom, however, keeps Nick from leaving, asking him to stay at the apartment for a party. Nick half-heartedly accepts the invitation. They enter the apartment, a tacky, cramped space with tapestries of Versailles on the walls. It perfectly exemplifies Myrtle's desire to live in luxury. Nick leaves to buy some cigarettes, but when he returns, Tom and Myrtle are nowhere to be found. They reappear just as the other three guests begin to arrive. First is Myrtle's sister Catherine. She was invited to keep Nick company. The second arrival is the McKees. Mr. McKee is a photographer, and his wife, Mrs. McKee, is often the subject of his pictures. Nick only now notices that earlier, Myrtle had changed her outfit. He also notices that after changing her outfit, her personality also underwent a drastic change. The earlier vitality was transformed into a sense of importance. Nick describes it as though the room was getting smaller, but she is just getting larger, becoming the center of attention. Mrs. McKee mentions that Myrtle would make a perfect model for her husband's photographs, and once again, Myrtle becomes the center of attention. Tom dismisses it and tells Myrtle to get the McKees a drink. Catherine asks Nick where he lives, and he responds that he lives in West Egg. She then asks whether Nick has ever heard of Gatsby, to which Nick responds that Gatsby is his neighbor. Then Catherine mentions that Gatsby is related to Kaiser Wilhelm, and that that's how he gets all his money. The conversation is interrupted by Mrs. McKee. After Mrs. McKee and Mr. McKee discuss how he would like to take more photos on Long Island, Tom teasingly offers up George as the subject. Catherine, continuing her discussion with Nick, states that Tom and Myrtle cannot stand their spouses. This was emphasized by Myrtle yelling obscenities when she overheard their conversation. However, Catherine and Myrtle believe that because Daisy is Catholic, Tom and Daisy can't get a divorce, which is obviously not true. There could be many reasons, but one could be that Tom actually does love Daisy, unlike Myrtle and George. Catherine and Nick keep talking. This time, they talk about Catherine's bad experience in Monte Carlo. Meantime, Myrtle and Mrs. McKee discuss class and marriage. Mrs. McKee was going to marry someone of a lower status, but was encouraged not to, which is why she ended up with Chester instead. Myrtle, on the other hand, says she married that lower class man. Catherine says that Myrtle was crazy about George, but Myrtle denies it. She tells a story of how George borrowed a nice suit for their wedding because he couldn't afford one. The party continues, with a bottle of whiskey circulating and the janitor bringing sandwiches up. Myrtle tells the story of how she and Tom met on the train. She continues to describe him through his perfect clothing, indicating that her interest in him is not due to true love, but due to his money. Myrtle and Tom have a violent argument where Myrtle keeps yelling, "Daisy, Daisy, Daisy," to Tom's discontent. To shut her up, he slaps her across the face, breaking her nose. Nick and Mr. McKee leave the party in the same elevator. Mr. McKee invites him to lunch. Then it's a haze. All of a sudden, Mr. McKee is almost naked on his bed, showing off his portfolio to Nick. Each photo's name has some relevance, like Beauty and the Beast, referring to Tom and his two relationships, or Broken Bridge, referring to Myrtle's broken nose. Nick wakes up on the train the next morning.